My guest today is Wole Moses, the Chief AI Officer for Civilian at Microsoft Federal. Wole, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. Agencies now have more than 1,700 use cases for artificial intelligence. The latest data from the Office of Management and Budget shows more than a 100% increase in the number of ways agencies are using these emerging capabilities. The Departments of Veterans Affairs, Homeland Security, and Interior are among the agencies with the largest number of use cases in the latest data. But the numbers alone don't demonstrate the impact and benefits of AI to agency missions. For example, agencies are using AI to analyze drone photos in large data sets. NASA, as another example, is using AI to implement a global surveillance program to study volcanoes. And there's dozens of examples of robotics process automation and lower level AI tools that are reducing burdens and accelerating timelines to projects. In fact, many agencies are still in what the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, described as the second wave of AI, which is based on machine or statistical learning. So, how can agencies achieve that third wave of AI where they're receiving benefits like contextual sophistication and explanation? Well, that's where my guest comes in. Wole is going to tell us how they're going to do that. So, what are some examples that you're seeing already where AI initiatives are really impacting mission outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I want to say that we're super excited and inspired by what we're seeing agencies do with AI. So in terms of specific AI use cases, we're seeing them kind of fall across a few core categories. So for example, we're seeing agencies build AI systems to improve customer service or citizen experience. We're seeing agencies deploy AI towards helping them accelerate the modernization of legacy applications. We're seeing them use AI to help them extract details, do some analysis, and do some summarization of knowledge within all the documents that they have. And then we're also seeing agencies use AI just to help them find information and institutional knowledge much more quickly. In terms of specific examples, one that I'll call out first in the sort of customer service category is Social Security Administration. So SSA, like many agencies, has a call center, and in the case of SSA, they had long wait times for citizens calling into their 800 number, and so that was kind of a challenge for them in terms of how do they reduce these long call volumes that were causing some dissatisfaction within folks who were calling in. The problem that they had was that they didn't really have, across the aggregate of calls that came in, they didn't really have a lot of good insight as to why people were calling in, what were some of the top reasons people were calling in, what were some of the trends around those calls. And so what they did is they used AI to, first of all, transcribe the tens of thousands of calls from voice to text. So they used speech to text AI for that part. And then they used generative AI to actually understand what was happening in these thousands of conversations. And so by doing that, they were able to finally understand what was happening in these calls. What are some of the top reasons folks were calling in, and and then make decisions and changes to some of their internal processes to address some of those. And so this is something that they couldn't do previously because just the person hours it would take for someone to actually listen into all those calls is something that really is impossible. And so that's one sort of customer service example. We're also seeing agencies use AI chatbots on their external web pages to provide really good interactions with citizens 24 by 7. And then the other category I talked about earlier was around modernizing applications. This is another key area where we're seeing generative AI specifically do a great job around helping agencies modernize legacy code bases for which in many cases there aren't people around who still understand those code bases. Think about COBOL and some other languages that we don't use as frequently today. AI is helping them modernize both simple sort of end user applications as well as mainframes.
I think all of these are really great examples. In fact, I know that the Technology Modernization Fund recently gave money to the Office of Personnel Management to do just that, use AI to modernize the code base. So it's a great example of one that's definitely gaining some momentum. Let's talk about the CX category because I think we've seen a big push over the last few years from the Biden administration around improving customer experience. Is this a matter of the technology has finally caught up to what to the call volume and the kind of can impact the situation, or is it the vice versa where maybe that technology has been there for quite a number of years, but the agency, in this case SSA, is more comfortable with what it can do? What's or you're going to tell me it's a little bit of both, probably.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I would say the one thing that's different now is generative AI. And so as you're alluding to, AI isn't necessarily new. The AI technologies have been in play for a while. But generative AI offers some new capabilities, especially around the ability to understand unstructured data in the form of, in the SSA example, in the form of call center conversations. But if you look across other agencies' use cases, think about all the documents and all the research documents, all the policy documents, and all the other unstructured data that it would have taken a human previously to understand. And so that's an example of where technology has enabled new capabilities and the ability to do things faster in more efficient ways, as well as to a better degree of certainty in terms of the outputs.
And that's the key, I think, what you just said. Do things faster and more efficiently, right? You can do things faster, but if it's not good quality or if it doesn't make the effectiveness is low, that doesn't help you. And if you can be more efficient, but it still takes hours and hours to do the work, I'm not sure what you're getting out of it. The knowledge management piece, as another example of the unstructured data, is also another great use case because agencies have struggled to really understand, okay, what do you know and how do you pass that knowledge to me if I'm coming in? Talk a little bit about that effort that you're seeing. Is this another kind of no duh moment? This would be the perfect example, and this makes so much sense for us.
100%. Yeah. So what you alluded to was really the transfer of institutional knowledge across the organization, whether it's to someone coming into the organization, or quite frankly, in many organizations, even I'm a person who's been around for a while, one of the challenges is how do I find all of this expertise that sits within the organization? I just don't know where to look. And maybe if I'm lucky, I can talk to the right person who can point me to the right direction. And so generative AI again is this is an area where it really flourishes in terms of being able to enable me to use natural language to find exactly what I'm looking for. And so again, this is another really powerful example of how AI is really coming to the fore in terms of solving some of these problems that we've had for a while that we really didn't have good solutions to.
Well, like you mentioned generative AI a bunch of times. There's a feeling that agencies aren't really quite ready, or they're very much in pilot mode. If we use the old crawl, walk, run, they're still crawling with generative AI. So, what are some of those, if you will, compliance, security, ethical considerations that they have to keep in mind as they start to dip more toes into generative AI?
Yeah, good question. Well, the interesting thing is that when we think about security and compliance, there actually already exists a lot of really good frameworks and a very detailed frameworks and policies around what agencies should be doing to ensure security and compliance. And so think about FedRAMP, think about a lot of other guidelines that are already in place. And so what we're recommending to agencies is to lean on those existing frameworks that are very well defined in terms of security and compliance procedures and governance. In terms of things like ethical and responsible AI, those are sort of newer topics. And so they may not necessarily be the agencies may not be as used to thinking about some of those things. But again, there are existing frameworks. And so, for example, the NIST AI risk management framework does a great job in terms of pointing out what are some of the new things or some of the new risks that generative AI introduces into agencies, and how do you, first of all, identify those? How do you measure those risks? How do you manage those risks that you measure? And then how do you operationalize the governance that you need to put in place? And then vendors like Microsoft provide tools to help agencies do all of those things in terms of helping them to identify those risks, measure, manage, as well as do the governance.
As you talk to agencies about this, do they get us are they getting more comfortable with that measuring, managing, operationalize the governance side, or where would you say they're in the early stages? And again, I know it's hard to blanket every agency, everybody is at different parts of the spectrum, but what are some of the trends you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those, it depends. And, some agencies, as you would expect, they're further ahead. Some agencies are a little bit more stepping back and doing some analysis. And so it really just depends. We're seeing it kind of happen all across the board. Well, what I will say is that one thing that's been surprising to me is how fast agencies have really leaned into, first of all, considering um, using AI in the way that they work, and then agencies are going even further at a pace that I wasn't really expecting in terms of doing ideation and doing pilots, and then finally moving things into production. And so that's one thing that's been a little bit astonishing to me in terms. I didn't expect the government to move this quickly in adopting a newer technology, and that's starting to happen. But yeah, absolutely, the conversation around measuring and managing risk is a big part of it. Agencies, I think, are in different level of maturity in that journey, though.
Do you get a sense it's because agencies start see the benefits so quickly? Just take your call center example from SSA. They probably were like, what do we do with all this unstructured data? They did a small pilot and said, whoa, now we see the two reasons why we get all these calls. You know, it's always these two questions that pop up. We can answer them and make the citizen experience better, and vice versa. The unstructured data piece when it comes to knowledge management, even if they just say, hey, we'll test it out on these policy documents and pull, and they're seeing such a big kind of wow moment that they want to go faster and take more advantage of it.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to that first example around the call center use case. So first of all, I'd say that we're seeing most success happen is where you have executive sponsorship from the very top, where you're seeing leadership within the agencies sign up and say, hey, we think we need to be using AI as part of the solution, and we need to be using these types of innovation that are available to us. We've experienced these in our sort of personal lives, be it with ChatGPT or other tools, and we think there's applicability into the workplace. Let's explore it. And so in that SSA example, the cool thing that we learned about there is that in their case, one of the things that they learned was that one of the top reasons people were calling in was because they didn't understand some of the notices that they were being sent by SSA. And so as part of that sort of virtuous cycle, as a next step, they can now use generative AI to help them rewrite those notices to make them a little bit more understandable. But so overall, I'd say that one of the big key things that we're seeing in terms of agencies that are adopting AI successfully is that there is leadership involvement, there is leadership support, there is executive sponsorship. The AI technology is not being used just for the sake of using technology. It's tied to some very specific business goals and business priorities where we're seeing that happen. We're seeing success. The other thing that we're seeing as a as one of the things that is driving success is that agencies that really elicit feedback and voice and support from diverse organizations and diverse voices within the organization are having more success. And so this shouldn't just necessarily be a technical decision. We need to have the technical people involved. We need to have end user involved. We need to have the business and the mission involved. And where we're seeing all of that happen, those confluence of voices and the confluence of ideas and feedback really lead to greater success.
I think that piece, what you said there at the end, is really important for folks to really let it sink in. Leadership involvement's great. It's great that Martin O'Malley, the former commissioner of SSA, was such a big proponent of using the technology, but bringing in the users, bringing in the mission, bringing in the technology, kind of creating that collaborative environment really is the end result is success. And I think that's probably true for any technology over the last 50 years or so. On that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Network. Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest is Wole Moses, the Chief AI Officer for Civilian at Microsoft Federal. Now, Wole, before break, you really did a nice job of outlining a lot of really interesting use cases from SSA to knowledge management and so many others. Let's talk about where AI is going forward. If you and I are still around in 3 to 5 years, what are we talking about? Where is some of those innovations and trends you're starting to see?
So yeah, this is one of the things I'm most excited about in terms of how fast this technology is evolving. both in sort of a general sense, but then also in particular with the federal government. And so, a few things I'm excited about are, first of all, the availability of Microsoft 365 Copilot for government agencies. So we made that announcement at the end of last year. It is now available. A lot of our customers have been waiting for that. And so we think that's going to be significantly important for agencies in terms of transforming the way knowledge work is done and just making people get be a lot more productive and providing sort of these superpowers for every single government worker. And so that's one thing I'm excited about. The other thing I'm excited about is you've probably started to hear about AI agents and autonomous agents. And so these are really, really exciting new technology, new space and technology where these agents are going to help us to automate and optimize business processes within agencies. And so that's pretty cool. And we're seeing some hints of that in the private sector in terms of what's possible. And I'm excited to see how government agencies start to deploy those. And then the last thing I'm excited about is some of the new modalities in terms of how we can interact with AI. So some of this is already available, much of it's already available. So, at first we could just chat with in terms of AI, we could just use our keyboards and chat, but now we can actually interact with our voices and AI will interact back to us in a natural way. AI can now see what we're seeing in terms of using a camera or seeing what's on our computer screen. And that opens the door for a lot of new possibilities in terms of how we can interact and engage with AI. And so those are three things I'd say that I'm particularly excited about I don't think it's going to take 5 years, but in the next year or so.
Folks have heard a lot about Copilot. Maybe just give us 30 seconds or a minute of what is Copilot? What does this mean for an agency who says, hey, I have Office 365, but I'm not sure I want to turn it on. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure why I turn it on. What would you tell them?
Yeah, so Copilot think about it as an AI assistant for your Office 365 or your Microsoft 365 environment. So it has access to the things that you have access to, but nothing else. And so it really operates as that personal assistant for you to help you do things like triage your emails much more quickly, or in a way that you ask Copilot to do. It can help you get started in your day in terms of looking at all of we get communications from lots of different sources, emails, we get communications in Teams chats, Teams channels. It's really difficult to keep up across all those things. And so Copilot is that, again, that personal assistant that's looking across all those inbound communications to you and letting you know what you need to prioritize. And probably my favorite example of using Copilot is Copilot in Teams meetings. And so if I happen to miss a meeting because I'm double booked or if I'm late for a meeting, the ability to use Copilot for me to ask Copilot what I missed in the meeting, what are some of the key points discussed, what are the action items, were there any action items assigned to me, if there were any, and really catch up on those meetings in a much more efficient way than I would without it. Those are just a few examples, but that's super powerful, and we're seeing in the private sector where we're seeing customers use it, we're seeing tremendously positive results in terms of their ability to operate more efficiently and be more productive.
Generally speaking, and I know every agency is different, so I'll give you the out, but are you seeing agencies starting to adopt Copilot?
So Copilot for the federal government, we just released it, so late December. And so we're definitely seeing agencies getting ready for it. So there's a set of things that agencies should think about in terms of preparing themselves for Copilot. So we've been seeing agencies prepare for it over the past year while they've been waiting for us to release it. And so that's the first step. We're excited they've done that work, and from there, they'll be well positioned to start to deploy it.
All right, well, good to hear that. I think folks may say, "Well, I heard about that it was coming, but I wasn't sure what the status is." So obviously, it's out there. The other two innovations you mentioned, I'm interested to delve into. You mentioned AI agents, autonomous agents to help optimize business processes. Well, what if they say, "Well, yeah, that's called RPA. We've been doing that for a decade now. This is the next step, or this is more advanced, I imagine."
Yeah, this is a little bit beyond what you could do with RPA. As a matter of fact, agents could actually integrate with RPA. There's no reason they couldn't do that. So Agents are a little bit different. I'll give you an example. So let's say that we were preparing for an event or a meeting like this. And so I'm going to be, let's say I'm going to be putting together an event. And this is a future event. Let's say a year from now, let's throw it out a year from now. And I need to work with maybe three or four other people on my team to prepare for this event. We need to have a planning meeting, all the sorts of things that we would normally need to think about it in terms of preparing for that. In this future with agents, I could just send a message to my agent and say, hey, I need to prepare for this event. I need these three other people to be involved. Go at it. The agent would then, on its own, send an email to those three other folks and let them know that, hey, Wole wants to do this event. We're going to have a planning meeting. I'm going to look at your calendar availability and find a time that works for all four of us. It would do that on its own, and after everyone accepted, it would report back to me that it's done that. And then maybe a day before the meeting, it would send an agenda to everyone who is taking part in that meeting, taking part of that meeting based on what I had initially said I wanted the meeting to be about. And it did all those steps just based on me saying, hey, set up this meeting about this topic and involve these three folks. That's just one example. You could also think about how an agent could fit into an existing agency process. And so that might look like a citizen fills out a form to apply for some program with the government agency. Today, you might have to have a human in the loop to read that form, and then maybe something is missing. They would send an email back to that citizen or business and let them know you need to correct this. In the future, an agent could do all of that.
And that's really what we're getting to is this idea of this. We heard it a number of years ago, low value work. Oh, I'm checking something that can be automated that can really say, okay, let me really get to the point of approving this form, or pushing, getting the form to the next person so they can approve it to get the disability paid, to get the benefit paid, or whatever it is. So it's really trying to reduce that, again, reduce the burden, and also increase the timeliness. The second piece is the chat. You mentioned this idea of chatting with AI, not just with your keyboard, but with voices and other ways that could share your camera. That's also a little weird, but also a little exciting at the same time. I think that's why
Yeah.
it's an emerging innovation, as you said. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's maybe an unexpected way to, especially with the human-like way we can interact with the computer now. And so I'm excited about that. I mean, think about the sharing of your camera example, sharing of your screen example. So think about that in terms of customer support. And so for as long as I've been at Microsoft, I've been the customer support agent for everyone in my family in terms of helping them fix their computer. Think about in the future, their ability to just talk to the computer and it can see everything they're doing, whether they're taking the right steps or not, and instructing them on the corrections they need to make. And think about that across reading documents, reading forms, reading web pages. There are just tremendous amount of possibilities in terms of AI being able to see what we see, both sort of in the world that we exist in, as well as what we're looking at on the computer screen.
Well, there's a lot of excitement around AI. We know that, but at the same time, there's challenges, there's pitfalls to avoid. What can agencies do, or what would you recommend they do to really find that success that you talked about in some of your examples?
So yeah, I think the things that where we've seen agencies be successful is to first of all align what you're doing with AI to some sort of mission or agency goal. We don't want to do AI for AI's sake, and so to ensure that your AI projects are aligned to the core strategies of your agency. You also need to make sure you have executive support, especially with technology that's new or newish. Uh, you want to make sure that there's support that makes sure that you want to make sure people are comfortable with how AI will be used. You also want to make sure you are aligning to some of those frameworks that I talked about earlier, like the NIST AI risk management framework, which as part of that talks about how agencies should think about use case selection and to think about risk as part of that, measuring risk as part of that use case selection. We shouldn't necessarily use AI for all things, and so we need to be thoughtful about that. Uh, Training. for employees is super important. So getting them used to these new tools in terms of how do we partner with these tools. In most cases, we're seeing that AI works best as a complement to the human. So it's not something that will replace what humans are doing or what the workforce is doing. It's something that's working right beside them, complementing them and giving them, making them more productive or giving them these superpowers to do things that they may not be able to do today or may not be able to do in the time that they would need to do those tasks. And then finally, the other thing is obviously there's some other things around change management internally, making sure you have governance in place, making sure your data governance strategy is on point. So those are some of the typical things that we've seen agencies do to be successful.
You mentioned the executive support earlier, which obviously is hugely important, but you mentioned also that people have to be comfortable with it as they use it in their personal lives, as they call up, their bank or their doctors or wherever, and kind of go through that chat bot and go through that use of AI. Do you think that that's the easier part? Is that a something that's happening where people are more or are getting, okay, I can use it in my personal life and therefore I can translate that into my work life as well? Or are they separate and not necessarily equal either?
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's something that, several years ago we used to talk about consumerization of IT. And when we talked about that is we saw this sort of merging between what people were using in their sort of consumer lives away from work and how that was driving preference and expectation for technology that they use in the workplace. And so I think this is what we're seeing in terms of AI is a repeat of that same thing. So we're seeing most people first be introduced to these amazing capabilities in their sort of personal consumer lives. And that not only makes them more comfortable, but it also drives expectations. In fact, we're seeing in many cases in organizations, and actually in majority of cases in organizations, we're seeing um, folks use generative AI on their own without it being something that the organization is providing to them. And so I think what that is indicative of is, first of all, they're getting a lot of value. They're seeing they from their personal life, in their personal uses, they've seen significant value, and they're saying, "Hey, I need to use this in the workplace because I can get that same value." So that's really one key takeaway. And so for organizations, that should be that's a clear, I think, clear call out for organizations that, hey, we need to see how we can embrace this and make sure this it's being used in a sanctioned way.
Well, in the last 30 seconds or so that we have left, what's the big takeaway from our conversation today? What's the one thing or so you'd want to make sure federal agencies keep in mind as they continue down this journey?
So for me, the clear takeaway is that agencies should start rolling up their sleeves and start using the technology. So this is a technology, AI is a technology that you need to experience firsthand in terms of building with it, ideating with it, finding out how it could be transformational within your organization. One of the things that we've seen some agencies do to be successful is to create communities of interest in terms of AI, where they create opportunities for learning, for sharing, for asking questions. As I mentioned earlier, we should ensure that that those communities have a wide composition of roles, whether it's researchers, whether it's technical people, business people, mission leaders. So those are some of the things I would encourage agencies to do. Start to experiment, start to get familiar with the technology, and start to ideate around how the technology can be transformational within your agency.
And I imagine with those 1,700 use cases, that's only just the top of the iceberg. There's probably so much more that they can do and that they're excited to do. Unfortunately, we're done with our iceberg. We're out of time for today. So let me thank my guest. Wole Moses is the Chief AI Officer for Civilian at Microsoft Federal. Wole, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.